Right, so we were discussing about the security. So within the security, uh, we have created the users inside the enterprise, inside the WebLogic console, right? So the users are available, and the users can log in, and we have the different roles within the users, and based on the roles, the users are able to look at the content inside the BI, right? So now, so if you create a user with a role of BI administrator, he can create the reports, he can edit the reports at the same time. You can also provide permissions, and you can delete and all the stuff, right? So for each role, you have the different roles and responsibilities. As an a BI consumer, he's just a business user, so where he can only look at the catalog and the reports available within the catalog. And if you look at the BI author, so he's a developer as well, where he can develop the report. And again, BI administrator, he is kind of a super user where he can do everything where BI consumer and author does, but at the same time, on top of these two, and he has the uh, features of the security, like you can arrange you can give the permissions, and you can delete the use reports and folders, and you can rename them. So those administrative accesses are available to the BI administrator. Okay, so now coming back to, so how exactly we I mean, these are the basic security features where you let the users access the reports and all the stuff based on the roles. But apart from that, these basic rules, what you can also do is you can also use these users that is created in the WebLogic, and based on these users, you can also customize your reports, or you can also add your security inside the repository as well. So now where we can use these users that are available in the WebLogic and implement the security within the repository as well. So essentially, when we talk about the security, these are the two types of securities that we'll talk about. Um, so one is the object level security, other is the data level security. So what is this object level security and data level securities? So I mean, it's essentially, if you look at the security, accessing the objects is one. At the same time, within the objects, accessing the data is the other security. In the sense, so suppose say, if you have, I mean, if to give you a simple example to identify the difference between these two objects. Suppose say, if I have a report, suppose a sales report. So having access to the sales report. So if I have access to the sales report, or if I don't have access to the sales report, that is an object level security. So which means I can assign a user with an access to the sales report is an object level security. So a user who's having access to the sales report. So which means I have set the access on the object which is a report. That is an object level security. So some users may see this report, some users may not see this report. So I'm setting the access to this object. That is object level. So what is the data level security? So data level security is, within the sales report, I look at the sales report, but suppose say I look at the sales report only for the sales area. Suppose say sales area equal to, suppose say New Jersey, assuming. Which means I'm looking at the sales report, but I'm looking at the sales only for a particular region, which is New Jersey region. I'm looking at the sales for a particular region, which is a New Jersey region. So this is the data level security. So which means you are giving access to the report, but again, you are making sure only a certain data is visible to this user. So which means if I log in as a Dinesh, assume that I belong to the NJ area. So now if I'm a business user who has logged in from a region NJ, I mean, or who is the manager for the region NJ, so would be able to look at the data only for the particular region. So which means you are still letting the user to access this report, but again you are also restricting the user, saying that no, okay, since you belong to the NJ region, you can only look at the data for the NJ. That is a data level security. So object level security is basically having an object, having an access to the object or not. You are going to decide that. Data level security is what level of data that a user can look at it. So these securities can be implemented inside the repository. So now again, so what is this repository has got to do with the security, and what kind of security that we can implement inside the repository? Remember, within OBIEE, you do not store any users inside the repository. All the users are stored inside the either a WebLogic server, as we discussed this the other day, in a default realm, right? So the users are stored in the realm of the WebLogic. That is one place. Or the users can be stored in any external LDAP tools like an Oracle Identity Manager, SiteMinder. So if your enterprise is a big enterprise, and if you're having an identity manager kind of stuff, identity manager, access manager kind of software installed in your environment, you can configure those things, and the users will be created there. So whenever you log into the OBIEE, OBIEE will always connect to the identity manager to authenticate you, and if you are authenticated on the system, the request will be redirected to the OBIEE. So in the sense, you are essentially, rather than authenticating the users within the same WebLogic server, you are sending the request to the third party authenticator. Simple. The reason they do in the enterprises is because in most of the enterprises, what they do is they create or they install one security application like an identity manager or SiteMinder or any vendor. So they will authenticate and authorize the request from that, so that it's a centralized location where you're maintaining the user and provisioning the users to the different applications. Suppose say the advantage is, if I'm a user, tomorrow if my job role changes, now I simply change the job role in my application like an OAM or any security application. Based on my job role, the access level to the different applications will automatically change. So one place you change it, and every application the user will have the specified access. Suppose if I leave the organization tomorrow, simply disable the user on the OAM will restrict the user to access to all the systems. So you don't need to go to the 10 systems and disable the user or delete the user. So because all these applications are connecting to the OAM for authentication, you change anything on the OAM will stop the user access to all these applications. Anyway, okay, so now we do not maintain any users inside the repository. The reason I'm saying we do not maintain any users inside the repository is before the 11G version, if you look at the 10G version, the users are part of your repository. The users are part of your repository. All the users are created inside the repository. Every repository has the user set. Okay, but in 11G, once we migrated to 11G, what they did is, they have moved all the users out of your repository and created them in the WebLogic. So that is one of the migration. So they have a small migration utility. If you use the migration utility and you migrate your repository, so what it will do is, the first thing it will do is it will move all the users available that in the repository to the WebLogic. So that is a major change that's done in the 11G compared to the OBIEE 10G. Okay, so let's look at if I don't have the users inside the OBIEE, then how do I really specify the different level of security inside my repository? because though we don't have the users available in your repository, but you can still access the users from the WebLogic. So let's go to the administration. Right, so manage. So there's something on manage identity. So manage identity is basically um, identifying your. So if I say identity, if you look at you in the identity manager, basically it's kind of manage users kind of stuff. So earlier we used to have an option called users, but it is kind of it is identity now. So if I look at identity inside the BIEE repository, there's users and the roles. So these are the roles that is available inside the WebLogic server, but there is no users that you're seeing. So there are users available, but you don't see those users directly. So how do I see? How do I see? How do I look at the users? Is basically you can go to the action. There is something called set online user filter. See, the reason it doesn't directly display the users is sometimes you may have like thousands of users. So your administration tool loading all those thousands of users inside your tool, this may crash your administration tool, right? Because there's a GUI, small GUI utility, and again it may take long time to download all these users to your repository. So rather, what you can do is you can simply look at the user that is required by setting a filter. So I can set a filter. Suppose if I want to display only users with the Dinesh, so something like a Dinesh star, then I can press OK. Display the user with starting with the Dinesh. Or if I would like to put simple star here, it will display all the other users. Okay, so I mean these are the users that is available inside my WebLogic. These are the users that is available in my WebLogic server. So I can see the same users available here. Let's see. These are the users that is available. Now, so what do I need to do with these users? What do I need to, how do I really access these users? Suppose if I see every user, right? Suppose I have Dinesh, right? So I can double click on my Dinesh, and this is the username, and this is the description. This is a log level. I'll explain what is a log level. So if you see here, the role of the user is consumer. So you can, it means like the user can only look at the reports. He cannot do much. Like he cannot create a report. He cannot edit the report, or he cannot set any permissions to the report. Right. So this is my consumer user. Suppose if I go to the Rajesh and you see I have because this is BIEE other. So if we define the BIEE other, then you will have the consumer as well as the other. So BIEE other is nothing but a developer. Right, so he's a BIEE administrator, so we'll have like more access. He's kind of a super user. He'll have everything. Okay, so he's access to all these rules. So I mean, it will automatically display depending on what user and what role you're actually with. So BIEE administrator is the kind of a high, I mean, superior role than the developer, because he is having the security, and you can set the permissions using the BIEE administrator. Right, so now what we are doing here is, if I have a user Dinesh and I go here, I can see this he is a consumer. Now this is a normal thing like a display name, description. So if you see, there is a one more configuration which is a logging level. So basically logging level is a one of the setting that we do here that will decide what level of the log information that OBIEE writes into the server. Suppose say if I log in as a user Dinesh and if I run a report, right? Obviously, when my report is when I run a report, obviously it get executed, right? When I run a report, it get executed on the server. When it get executed on the server, in the runtime, the server writes some log details to the file. Server write log details to the file, which means logging information. So the execution of a report is added to the log file. So in the sense, suppose anything, right? Anything that you run on the server will run it. Since the server will run it, it will maintain its execution details. That is nothing but the log details. So if you see here, if I say the log 0, which is like basic logging level, it doesn't really write anything to the log file. But the moment you start increasing the log level to the 3 or 4, then server start writing more detailed information into the log file. So the reason we put more logging level, suppose say now when I run a report, I want to understand like what is the query that is being sent to the server. So what is the query that is actually executed on the server. So suppose say when I run the report, but again I don't see the required details within my report. So, assuming that I have the data in the database, but for some reason I'm not able to see all this data in my report. Some of the data is missing. So I would like to troubleshoot my report, like why is this data missing? Then what the easiest thing that I can do is I can increase the log level. When I increase the log level for a user, so what happens is when I execute this report with this logging level, what happens? My server starts writing more log information to the log file, so I can go to the logs and I can I can troubleshoot the issue. I can identify the issue. So where does it actually write this log information? Is basically there is a file called nqquery.log. I think I'll spend some other time with these files. There are a couple of files that is available inside the OBIEE. When you actually go to the file level and when you actually go to the detail level, and when you navigate to your file system, suppose inside the OBIEE file system, if you navigate to the different folders, what are the different files available, what each file is does, and all the stuff. But again, in 11G, you don't need to go to the file system level and do anything on the file system level because it's an automatic deployment and everything is an automatic on the browser. You don't need to go to the log and you don't need to go to the file system and do anything. But yes, sometimes if you would like to troubleshoot the things and if you want to kind of have more control on understanding and more control on what's happening inside the server, then having some knowledge on the file system, like what are the different log files available, what are the different configuration files available, what are the different execution files available, those things will actually help you. Right, so now coming back to this, so if I have more log level, then I'll have the more log details. If I have less log level, I have the less log details. So by default, the user is created with the log level 0. The reason is because when you are with the log level 0, you don't write anything to the log file when you execute. Yeah, obviously, right, because when you start writing more log details to the server is spending a lot of time in writing the log details, right? So it's kind of additional load on the server. So as a business user, when somebody is executing the reports, you don't need to really print the detailed level of information into the log files, which will unnecessarily delay the execution and unnecessarily creates the load on the server. So that is the reason by default we create it with the log level 0. But when you have some issue, when you would like to troubleshoot something, so what you can do is you can increase the log level, so that when you increase the log level and when you execute the reports with a more log level and more detailed information is printed to the log file. A more detailed information is printed to the log. That is the advantage of the setting, which is a logging level setting. Okay, so if you look at the permissions, so for this user like Dinesh, if you look at the permissions, and I see the different permissions available. Suppose if there is something around object permissions, there is a data filters, there is a query filters. Okay, object permissions is something the permissions to the object. Well, suppose say I have like different objects available, so I have the different tables, right? So you can set like this user Dinesh, the permission that I'm setting to the user Dinesh, right? I can set the user Dinesh is having XYZ permissions or ABC permissions. I can set all those things inside the object permissions. In the data filters, I can specify like this is kind of a data level security. I can specify what kind of data he can look at it is. What is the filters that I can add? A query limits is basically to a particular database. What is the limits that I would like to set? Okay, so coming back to here. So this I'm talking about permissions to a particular user, right? Okay, so this user, what kind of permissions that this user can have on these objects? What is the objects is all about? Suppose say if I have north subject area, within the north subject area I have my offices, different tables, right? I have a revenue table, I have products table, I have time table. Okay, so now these are the different objects that I have. So I can set permissions on any of these objects. Like, and I can set the permission at the subject level, even on the table levels, even on the column levels. So permissions can be set in any way to a user. So let me show you how does it really work. Okay, so if I go to the identity, I can put a star here. Right, so this is the list of users that is available inside my user list, and I can go to the Dinesh, and for the user Dinesh, I can set the permissions. Alright, so in the object permissions, what I can do is I can simply add. Okay, in the object permissions, I can simply add the user. Suppose if I say add the users, say add. If you look at here, I have the different objects available. Suppose if you look at my sales north, within my sales north, I have the different subjects like offices, revenue, products, time. Okay, and if I look at the sales south, I have the different objects for the south. So I have the objects for north and the south, and within the south, north, and I have the different things. Suppose say, assuming that in the north I have offices. Suppose say I say offices, right? So if I select OK, now what is that I'm doing is I'm setting the permissions to the user if we can access the north. Suppose say if I see here, I can set this user whether he is able to access the north or not. Right? So this is my offices. If you look at the offices, for these offices I have the access, like on the user Dinesh is having a read access, and if I specify no access, which means the user Dinesh doesn't have access to the offices object. Suppose if you look at here, so sales north offices, within the sales north there is a offices table, and he doesn't have access to the offices table. Okay, so I have modified my user and I've set the permission. I can say check in, save. Okay, so now what I can do is now if I log in as a user Dinesh, and if I set the permissions, so now when I log in as a user Dinesh, say if I say okay, I don't even have access to my business user, right? I cannot even see any of these objects. Now let me do the same thing. let me set the permissions to the developer, because if I set the permissions on this guy offices, I set it to Dinesh, but again, since he is an author, he cannot even see these objects at all. I mean, he doesn't have access to create the report, so he doesn't see these things. But again, in the reports, he cannot access the reports that is created based on the offices, because he doesn't have offices access. So suppose if I have reports all this here, so within these reports, if there is any report which is using the offices, he cannot look at that report. So that's kind of security. But to understand much in detail, if I set the permissions to the user, setting the permissions to the user, Dinesh, you can set to another user, I think Rajesh or somebody who's BI author. BI author is basically he's an author, right? He can create the report. So I'm going to set the permissions to Rajesh, saying Rajesh doesn't have access to my offices within the sales north. He doesn't have access to the offices. Okay, I say check in, save. So now I sign out of user Dinesh and I log in Rajesh. Okay, if I create a new analysis, so I can look at the sales north. I mean, if I select the sales north as the subject area where I would like to create the report, now I shouldn't be able to see the offices object that is available to the user Rajesh, because I have set the permissions as no access. See, within my sales north, what do I have in my sales north? If I look at my repository, if I compare my repository, within my repository I have my offices, revenue, products, and the time. But again, the objects that I see, offices, I don't see offices here, revenue, product, and the time. I only see these three objects. I don't see the objects for offices. That's where my subject area is all about. So that's where I set the permissions to my subject area. Right. So now, so that's kind of security where we are applying that the user can see what a user can see, what a user cannot see. So when I'm creating a report as a developer or as a business user and as a other, so we can set a certain permissions to the different objects, because the user may not really I mean, the user shouldn't look at that detail. Suppose if I log in as a WebLogic now, if I try to create the report on the same kind of subject area, which is north, and let's say if I say sales north, and I can see all the four objects: offices, products, time, and the revenue. So that's the difference between having access to the kind of objects which is in offices. So depending on the level of access that you have, you can see those many objects only. Okay, so that's one of the security that we can implement, which is I can say object level security. So I can go and I can set the permissions to the user at different objects. So what I can look at the column level also, or I can do it from here. This is one thing, or I can also start from here. Suppose if I say offices, or if I say individual column also. So say within the products. Suppose I want to set the permission on the product type. I double click on the product type. And if I see here, I have an option called permissions. So what does this permissions is all about? I can set the permissions, and when I click on the permissions, it will display all the options to me. In the sense, we have the list of different users and different roles available, right? So all the users and the roles will be displayed here, and I can set what a user have access to, what a user doesn't have access to. In the sense, depending on the security that I specify, the object will be visible to the particular user. Suppose if I say this object is not available to certain users, say I can specify no access. I can specify no access. Whatever the objects that I specify no access, right? Those users and roles will not be able to see this particular column, which is a product type. That is the kind of security that I can implement. So that is what I call it as an object level security. So if I go back here in the manage identity, and I can go and I can set these kind of security to the different objects, which we can control what is displayed or what is not displayed. Okay, if I look at the data filters, I can see what kind of data that I can see. In the sense, data level security is basically where I can specify the filters for my data. Suppose say within the products, so, which means my user can look at the products, but again I would like to control the information that he can see on the products. Suppose say I can specify a filter within the filter. So this is my logical table. This is the products, right? So brand. I can say, see what is that I'm doing here. I'm trying to set a data filter on my object, which is my products. Okay, within the products I have the data filters, logical tables, products. What is my columns, which is my product brand. So my product brand equal to what? Bistec. Suppose if I want to set a filter, so what is it I'm doing? I'm setting a product brand and I'm setting the condition to what? Bistec, where the user should look at only the data for a particular brand, which is a Bistec. So this is my data level filter, which means my user Rajesh is having access to the object, which is the products, but he is able to look at only the data for the particular brand, which is a Bistec brand. I click OK. So I simply check in and save. So now if you look at the report, right? So suppose let me create a report with a user web logic. So to understand how this data level security will apply. So I'm logging in as a WebLogic user and I'm creating a report as a WebLogic user. Say product brand, revenue. I click on the results. So I can see the brand and the revenue for 3 brands that I have. So I can say save. And so let me put it in test. So I can say brand report. I'll override this brand report. Okay, this is a brand report. I go to my catalog and I can see a brand report. Okay, this is my brand report. Now suppose if I log in as the user, say Rajesh. Okay, now if I go and if I look at the catalog and if I go to the test and I say open my report, which is my brand report, then I can see only the data for the Bistec, which means the report is the same report. The report is the same report. Whether I have not changed anything here. So report is the same report. But if you look at here, I have not set any filter on the report, right? Suppose if I go and edit the report, and if I look at the report, there is no filter, there is nothing, there is no criteria. It's a simple criteria, there is no filters, nothing. There's no, but again, so if I log in as a user Rajesh, and if I access the report, I don't see any data other than the Bistec, because in my data filters, in my kind of user level security, which is nothing but data level security, in the permissions I set the filter Bistec. So now if you log in as this user anytime and you run the report, any report that is using this object products, you can only see the data for that particular product, one product, which is a Bistec. That is the kind of data level security that I can implement. So I can add as many as objects to this user, saying that this user can use this user cannot see this user can see this. So depending on your data requirement, what the user shouldn't look at it, you can control, or you can allow what a user can look at it. So that's the data level security. Okay, so apart from this object permissions, which is nothing but object level security, which will allow the users to have access to the certain objects inside the presentation layer or inside your repository, and data filters is which will allow the access to the objects, but it will control the users to have access to the only certain objects that is defined. Okay, if you look at the query limits, the query limits will actually specify the limits that my users can have at a particular database level. Suppose if I see like, and this is my ORCL database, which is nothing but my source. Okay, so there is a setting that I can restrict. So what is the restriction? So see, you need to understand one thing here. So why do I need to limit queries? If you look at the reporting perspective, right? So no, a report is nothing but a set of queries, right? So every report that you run, that is internally a query to the database. So what we are actually trying to do here is, when I run the report, right, I would like to see that the impact on the database. Suppose say there are a number of users, right, business users. If you look at the OBIEE world, it's a combination of users. There's many users that will be accessing your environment, including the business users from different locations and different levels. Some may be normal kind of a field level supervisors or engineers, or some may be like senior management. Right. So now, again, so we would like to set a limit to individual users, saying, okay, because I don't want my field levels engineers or, supervisors to be accessing the very confidential reports. And at the same time, I don't want my users should be accessing the reports like last 1 year, last 3 years, last 5 years. Because, if you as a user run a report for last 5 years, imagine the kind of a data that we pull from the database, right? It's kind of a hectic data. So when I pull data like last 5 years data, which we are loading the server or loading the database as well. So we can set a certain query restrictions here, so that we let the users with a kind of a particular level enjoy the kind of a speed or enjoy the performance of the report. Suppose say you can restrict the database access to the reports to the users on certain days also. Suppose say, and I don't want anybody to access this kind of Saturday, Sunday. So if I specify not on Saturday, Sunday, now you as a user, when you log in as a Rajesh, log in and try to run any report on Saturday, Sunday, which is using this database, I will not be able to see any data because I don't have access to connect to this database and pull the data on Saturday, Sundays. So that is one level of restriction that I can add. At the same time, I can also specify from Monday to Friday, probably from 8 to 11, assuming. Or 7 to 11 or 8 to 11. Or diesel. So which means during these peak hours, like during the initial hours of the day, where the kind of senior managers access the report, and I don't want this particular user to access. I mean, it's not required that you have to always use a user. See, these kind of security things you can set on a user. At the same time, you can also set on a role as well. Suppose say I assume that I created a role, so I can also set the permissions on a role as well. Suppose say I've created some sample role, so I can go to a role and I can say I can add permissions to this role. So the same thing are applicable. And the difference between a user and a role is basically role is a group of users, right? So which I'll show you like how a role looks like. Okay, so I can set the permissions as coming back here. I can set the query limits, like what you can do, on what days you can access data, what days you cannot access data. There is something called max rows. And this is the restriction that you can set, like a maximum number of rows that can be retrieved by this user. Suppose when I run a report, what is the maximum number of rows that my report can pull data from the database? So it's 100,000. which is kind of 100,000 rows I can extract, and I can do the report on those 100,000 rows. Suppose if I set the limit as a 10,000, which means I can only extract 10,000 records from the database. When I run a report, I can only display 10,000 rows. Okay. Now that is the one setting that you can do. So there is something called max time in minutes. Suppose say when I run the report, what is the maximum time that the report can take, the query can take? Suppose say when I run it, if my request is being executed for more than 10 minutes, if my request is being executed for more than 10 minutes, then the request will automatically get closed. In the sense, the time is something, what is the maximum time my query can run on the database. If the query is taking more than 10 minutes, what it will do, it will automatically close the connection. So that's kind of other security principles, which is the maximum number of rows and maximum time my report can execute. So we'll see this execute direct database later. Okay, so this is kind of restrictions that we can set on individual user or a group inside the repository. So that's the only piece of configurations that we do in the repository in terms of security. That is the reason we don't really create the users inside the repository. We simply access the report that is available as part of the WebLogic from the manage and identity feature. There you can set the security. Okay, now so going back to kind of other features of the security, if I look at my console of the WebLogic, no, if I see the other place that we look at and we implement the security is the enterprise manager. So as I told you, the other day, there's a couple of things that we discussed. So there is a users, there is a role, which is nothing but my permission. There's a users roles as well as the privileges, where I have a users here where I can set the users to the roles and the privileges. Users roles as well as the privileges. So you create the users and you assign the users to the different roles, and you can also specify the privileges to the role, saying what a user can do, what a user cannot do, and other things. So now so far we have seen how to create the users, where we created the users inside the WebLogic console. We go to the realm, and inside the realm we created this user. So this up to this part, and we do it in the console. The setting can be done on the WebLogic console, and these things we can do in the enterprise manager. These two things we can do in the enterprise manager. So this is how the implementation is done. Basically, OBIEE is a little different to the other Fusion products, because it has the influence of the previous version, which is OBIEE 10G. So when they did the migration from kind of OBIEE 10G to OBIEE 11G, essentially what they had to make sure is they had to see that the existing OBIEE 10G reports execute perfectly, and existing OBIEE 10G things are kept in place without impacting the existing reports. So even when it comes to the security, so rather than using the entire WebLogic specific security features, they had to implement the specific security features that is available as part of OBIEE. That is the reason. So what they did is, instead of adding those to the WebLogic, because WebLogic is a generic, right? So it's been used by different applications. So what they did is, instead of adding that security features, which is specific to OBIEE, to the WebLogic, what they did is they added it to the enterprise manager inside the OBIEE. So that's where you see the roles and privileges, which is specific to the OBIEE part, is available in the enterprise manager. Okay, so now, so I'll just log in as a WebLogic. If you look at the business intelligence, this is my so if I look at, this is my core application, right, where I can see my business intelligence application running. And so I can right click on my core application. There is something called security. Core application security. Within the security, I can see these two things. One is application roles and the application policies. So roles is something in as I showed, as the roles are something that is defined on top of the users. So again, this core application is specific to BI, right? So this is specific to Oracle Business Intelligence. And if I right click and if I set security, and this is something on roles that I can specify. If I see there are, if I click on the roles, it will display the roles that is available. We already created kind of, if you look at it here, there is a certain roles that is already by default available. There are certain roles that I created, so probably let me remove these roles that I've created. I can delete them because these are the roles that I defined, specifying the nation of. Okay, so these are the different roles that is available here. So I have my role, which is a BI system role, and the administrator role, author role, and the consumer role. So what is these roles like? You have these are the default roles, right? So you have the administrator and other consumer. These are the default roles that is available, which means when you install the OBIEE, these roles are already available. These roles are already available, and they're already in place. Okay, and if I see here, and I can create a new role, or I can edit the existing role or something. Suppose if you look at this administrator role, so he is an administrator, and the other role is having like certain permissions, consumer role. Okay, so if you look at every user, so he's having membership. I can kind of so this administrator consumer shouldn't have other, but for some reason it's got added here. But let's not worry about these settings. But again, the ideally, I mean, this is more of an administrator activity. Don't mess with these existing roles, because um, if we change any of these existing roles, or if we delete any of these existing roles, which is kind of built-in roles, so there is it's very difficult to kind of get them again. So sometimes you may not even be able to log in, or you may not be able to even look at the report. So again, restoring them is a very difficult task. You may need to reinstall your OBIEE again, unless you have kind of a very much WebLogic administration skill. I don't know. Again, it's very difficult once you kind of change any permissions for these default roles. So let the default roles be as it is. Let's not disturb those roles. But again, as I said, these are the four default roles that is available as part of your OBIEE, which will get created at the time of installation. So, and again, that's what is that we are doing so far. We are creating the users. When I create the users, I'm adding the user to any of these roles, right? That's what I'm doing. So I'm creating a user. I'm adding this user to any of these roles. My user can be a author or a consumer or administrator. This is the default. So now I can also create my own role as well, because at the end of the day, um, see, when I say administrator, administrator is having a certain level of permissions, right? So he's an administrator. He's having like in 20 permissions, 20 privileges. So now what I say is, I can. Why do I create a user with all these 20 privileges? So say maybe when I say administrator, could be there are many administrators, right? Suppose say in your OBIEE as well. So I say BA administrator. So when I say OBIEE administrator, so why is this one administrator to have all the permissions? Suppose there may be like in different administrator that I would like to create, where some administrator is having access to the repository. Okay, this subject administrator is having access to the repository. So this administrator may be having access to the catalog. This administrator may be like he is managing your BA publisher. Right, so now I may have the different level of administrator, like like a bank, you have like a kind of a locker manager or account manager or kind of different managers, right? So you have the different managers in your bank, like though he's a manager, but he's having a specific role. The same way here, in general, what WebLogic is defined, what OB is defined as, administrator with one administrator, so BA administrator. So I can create any number of users with this role. But if you think, I would like to have this administrator do only a particular job, not everything, then I can create my own role, which says that okay, this role will let you to do only this thing. So that's something like that I can do. So how do I create it? I can create a role with this administrator, but what I can do is I can control these at my privileges. I can control these things at the privileges level. So let me go and let me create my own role. Suppose say create, when I'm creating a role, suppose say I can say Dinesh 123. I can give anything. So this is my role name, Dinesh 123, and I can say Dinesh role description. So now under this role, who are the members that comes to this role? So an application role may need to be mapped to users or groups defined in the enterprise LDAP server. The role can be mapped to other application roles. So which means I can add the members of this role. Suppose say I can say I can search the roles. So these are the different roles available. So application roles, or I can also add users. But again, so adding the users at this level makes no sense. So I can add the role which is administrator, which means my role Dinesh is kind of my BA administrator is a member of this role, which means whatever the BA administrator permissions that is available that are applicable to your role Dinesh 123 is kind of you are creating a role similar to the BA administrator. So that's kind of you create your own role. Or suppose if there is I'll give an example. If I create a user and for this user I have set XYZ permissions and ABC permissions, I did all the stuff, assuming. Now, if I want to create a role similar to that user, what I can do, I can create a role, I can add that user here. So which means whatever the permission this particular user is having, those things will come to this particular role. So that's what I can say, creating an application role. So I have created the role here, Dinesh 123. Now, so creation of the role is a good way I've defined this role, but again, how do I control this role? That's where I talk about permissions and the privileges. So now role creation is very straightforward, pretty straightforward. You can use any of the existing roles. You can create a new role and you can specify the users to add to that role. That is straightforward. So what else you would like to do is you'd like to specify your security, and for this particular roles you'd specify the application policies. Okay, so within the policies I can specify what policies that I would like to implement. Suppose say I would like to set a policies to the, see, suppose if I look at my policies, so this is my BA administrator, right? So for my BA administrator, these are all the different policies that I have. Suppose he can manage the repository, he can manage the jobs, and he can manage catalog, he can administer the server, and all the other things. There's a number of policies that my user is having, this particular role is having. That's what I'm saying. I can set. See, this is like this is the 20 jobs that this user can do, this role can do. So if I assign this role to a particular user, which means he can do all these jobs, all these permissions, right? Now, so what is that I'm doing here is I would like to set my policies for what? For my new role, right? So I can create a new policies, and I can say policy for what? See, select the grantee user group. So for which user you would like to set the policies. So I say search, and there is a role, right? What is the role that I created? Dinesh123. I would like to set the policies for the user for the role Dinesh123. So, and I can set the permissions. If I say add permissions, I can search. So these are all the different permissions that is having. These are all the different permissions that is available inside my OBIEE. So I would like to set only for the manage repository, and this particular role is having only the manage repository permissions. So now what is, if I see here now, my BA administrator is having the different roles here. He's having multiple roles, right? Suppose my Dinesh123 is the same as BA administrator because he has the permissions as a BA administrator, because I've created this role as a similar to the BA administrator. But if I look at the, if I select this one, what is the permissions that I have? I have only permission for the manage repositories where I don't have the other permission. So though my Dinesh123 is a BA similar to the role BA administrator, but he is having the limited access, which is manage repositories only. So if you look at here, the security is implemented at 3 levels. One is the user level, role level, and the privilege level. So you can create the users and you can group the users. So the advantage of the role, the advantage of the group is basically you can create a role and you can assign the users to the role. So remember, like, how did I assign the users to the role? I can go to the console. Within the console, when I create the user, I have an option to assign it to a role. I mean, so obviously, that when the user is created, for this user, I can specify which role he belongs to. So suppose I have 100 users and I can add 100 users to one particular role. So that way, if I want to set some privileges, permissions in the repository also, I double click on the role and I set the permissions to a role. So I do not need to go to the individual users and set the permissions. I can set the permissions at the role level, so that all the users belong to that role will automatically get the particular access. So you can say security realm, my realm, users and groups. You see here, this is my Rajesh. If I look at my Rajesh, and my Rajesh belongs to role what? BA other. So which means I created a user and assigned the role to the BA. So this role that I have newly added is not available here. So probably it should get refreshed. But again, you have the kind of standard roles: BA consumer, BA administrator. So BA other, where is it? I don't know, for some reason some roles are not available here. But again, BA other is already added here. So consumer, administrator, other. Yes. Okay, so you have the roles available, but again, I don't know why the role that I've newly created, which is the role here that I created, Dinesh123, this should be available, but for some reason I don't see it here. It should get refreshed or something. Just created it, probably may require a restart or so. Okay, so that is how you add the users to the roles. So when you create the users here, so you can specify which role this user belong to. So accordingly, all the users will get added to the particular role. So now say if I've added 100 users to a particular role, which is say Dinesh 123 role, assuming 100 users have added Dinesh 123 role. Now what I can do, I can go to my enterprise manager when I'm implementing the security identity. So if you look at the role, I don't see Dinesh 123 role. Yeah, I see Dinesh 123 role here. Now I'll just say synchronize application roles. I see, but these roles should be deleted because I deleted them. I don't know. Okay, so this is Dinesh 123 role, and I can set the permissions to the Dinesh 123 role. So I can add whatever that I want, and object level permissions are. So if you look at here, Dinesh 123 role, who's having Dinesh 123 role, Suresh, WebLogic, BI admission. These are the different members of this role. So if I set the permissions, and all these members will have the same set of permissions. Like that, now I can create a role, and I can add all these kind of users to this role. Then whatever the kind of permissions that I set on these users, they will see the kind of a repository objects with the same level of permission. So it's kind of a group, right? So suppose say if I have a kind of 100 users, so if I want to set a permission to the 100 users, rather than me going to individual user and for every user setting the same permission, is a difficult task, right? But if I create a group and I add all these 100 users to a group and set the permission to a group, which means all the users under that group will have the same level of permission. That is easier for me to manage and operate the things. That's the way we create the roles for the easier management. Like we can manage the group of users. That is the advantage. Okay, so that is in terms of the security in OBIEE. Okay, it says it's not defined in the enterprise manager. That's fine. It requires to refresh because there are certain roles available here, but the roles are deleted from the enterprise manager. It's giving a warning. That's it. And warnings are fine. I mean, if you are aware of those warnings, if you are aware that there is something that is you have done that is not going to impact, that's fine. I mean, so if there are errors, you have to fix the errors before you proceed. But warnings are okay. Okay, so that's what the security implementation inside the OBIEE, where you can see it. But there are many more things that we can see, like managing the catalog and setting the catalog permissions and all the stuff. But when we come to the reporting, we'll explore the security at the reporting level. Like what is the catalog and how do you set the permissions at the catalog level and all. You can even set the permissions at the dashboards and dashboard objects. Many things that we can do, but again, when we come to this reporting part, we'll explore. That makes sense, because if I don't want to confuse you by taking you to the catalog and the dashboards and all those stuff now, and showing only the security part. That makes no sense, because you need to understand what they are, and then we will discuss what is the security that we can implement on those objects. Okay, all right. So any questions before we wrap it up? Anything that you don't understand? Okay, guys. If there's no further questions, then we'll wrap it up for today. We'll see tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll discuss the session variables.